my brains. Ow.
Welcome back to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where I review the movies I have just seen as I am driving home from the theater. And, folks, we have a really rare occurrence here. I come before you aghast and agog and other words that sound like they're nonsense words but are in fact not. I've mentioned this several times, mainly because I repeat myself a lot, because I'm working unscripted, and mainly also because I'm kind of shocked that this is the case, but I've been doing this for 10 years now. And in that time, I've seen a lot of movies. And I'm used to having my expectations met or dashed. I've seen big budget films that I was very excited for fall flat. I have seen supposed duds offer more than anyone gave them credit for. I have seen overhyped films that failed to impress. I have seen advertised films that offer more or take more chances than any of their big budget brethren. I've seen movies that are so wrong-headed, you wonder how did they make it out of the development stage, let alone the process of actually casting, writing, filming, editing, and distributing it, even if it's just direct to a streaming service. I've seen movies that are forgettable to the point where when I go back at the end of the year and I'm trying to organize my list, I see these titles and I'm like, what the hell was that? But there's usually one true force that I can say for just about every movie I've ever reviewed, and that is when I come out of the theater or when I finish watching it on whatever streaming service or whatever, I usually have a pretty good idea of if I liked it or not. Now, the nature of the beast is that, sometimes maybe my initial impression is not correct. Maybe I didn't like something as much as I felt like I did at the time. For instance, I gave a very, very positive review to the Snow White remake earlier in the year, and upon retrospect, I didn't think it was as bad as everyone made it out to be, but I certainly don't think it was an A movie. So, so sometimes it may also take me some time to develop an opinion about a film, but I usually have a decent idea of, did I at least enjoy it, or did I hate it, or and I am struggling to remember if there has ever been a movie that has confused my critical sensors to the point that this one has. I watched this movie, and it is a litany of contradictions. Every cynical, mean-spirited, critical bone in my body tells me that this is a film I should be ripping apart. That it barely achieves a status above a sci-fi original movie. I wonder if that reference even makes sense anymore. Does sci-fi is that even still a thing? First of all, and two, do they still do their shit made for TV movies? I don't know, but I'm going to stick with it. I'm old. If you don't get the reference, go look it up. Anyway, nary a star or even recognizable actor to be found. A script that feels like it was Baby's first screenplay. And yet, And yet, I cannot bring myself to hate this movie. But I also can't bring myself to say I like it or that it's good. But amongst all of the negative, there are true moments of, dare I say, brilliance or maybe even greatness. And I don't know where my head is at, especially even in this new format that I'm doing, because it used to be that, yes, I reviewed the movie right outside the theater, or right after watching it, I'd go to the car and review it. I've stopped doing that, and I give things a day at least to kind of ruminate in there. But even that, I wake up this morning just as confused on my feelings of this film as I was after it completed. So we're going to go through this. We're going to try to go through this in no particular order, but I'm going to try to keep my thoughts organized on it and kind of give you an example of the bizarre two-face duality of this little film called Red Sonja. So first of all, you'll be forgiven if the name maybe sounds familiar, but not familiar at all. So Red Sonja, I'm not sure if it started out as a comic book first or as the movie first. But I do know that most famously, it was a movie back in the 80s. It was one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's early films. I think it was meant to be a spin-off or a continuation of the success of the Conan the Barbarian movies that he had. This one starring Bridget Nielsen, who would go on to be in Rocky IV and I think Beverly Hills Cop 2. During that brief period in the 80s when this kind of statuesque Amazon woman was like a real Hollywood oddity. I think some people still kind of remember that film fondly, though it has fallen somewhat out of favor. It doesn't get talked about. It's not the cult classic that, the Conan movies are. It has lived on in comic book form. I know there's even a comic book of it today. As a matter of fact, I think she just did a crossover with Spider-Man, believe it or not. So it's your typical sword and sorcery barbarian movie. I'm not going to waste a lot of time going through the plot because it's your standard Conan, Dragonheart, medieval barbarian type movie. There's an evil emperor dickhead. He's going around being a dick. People say to him, stop being a dick. He says, shan't. Enslaves people. One of the slaves rises up, leads a rebellion, yada, yada, yada. You know the drill. There's nothing really new here. Of course, there's some magic MacGuffin he's looking for. There's a very vaguely defined prophecy that is at play. I think if I was reading it correctly, I think Emperor Dickhead has misinterpreted some prophecy about someone rising up, bringing balance to the Force, being the one to take down Lord Voldemort, whatever. Misinterprets it to be about him when in fact it's about our hero Sonja the whole time, and he's looking for a magic MacGuffin book. There's a lot of kind of confundery in there. Right there, okay, that goes in the cons column. Let's do a pros and cons. So that goes in the cons column, I'm sorry. There are too many cooks as far as the story goes.
Too many cooks, too many cooks, too many cooks, too many cooks.
The bad guy looking for a magic MacGuffin and a prophecy, and he's also the villain. Vaguely reminds me of, I don't know how many people get this reference, but in the 90s Aladdin spin-off cartoon from the Disney movie. They had a recurring villain called Mechanicles, who like was a inventor and had all these kind of steampunk like machines Aladdin would have to fight. He's kind of like that. He's building all these magic machines powered by some vaguely defined force, and there's just too much going on. Which is weird to say in a plot this thin. I think you just stick to the standard plot of, I want to rule the world, so I'm going to be a dick, and everyone says, hey, stop being a dick, and I'm not going to stop being a dick until someone forces me to stop being a dick. I think that's all you really need. I think the rest of it, the MacGuffin, the prophecy, it all just, it muddies the waters, and I think you can do it, but you need a more nuanced screenplay than this one is working with. So that's a notch in the cons column. Let's talk about a pro. One of the first things I noticed about this film. This film is really beautiful to look at. And I'm not just talking about the lovely young lady in the barbarian bikini. I'm speaking of, like, the cinematography and the locations are all very lush and green, and there's this beautiful forest that they're filming in with, you know, the trees are just insanely green, and there's these very beautiful purple flowers. It's a much prettier film than these barbarian movies tend to be. These barbarian movies are usually, you know, back in the Arnold days, they're usually very desert heavy, you know, very earth tones, very muted in terms of color palette, you know, a lot of blacks, a lot of browns, some beiges. You even look at the attempts to do some, there was a Hercules boom a couple years back where they tried to do Hercules movies, and all of those, the color palette was very muted, mainly because they were trying to, you know, hide the really shitty CGI. I just went through puberty on that line. Hide! So that was one of the first things that struck me, is that this film really is embracing color and a lot of practical landscapes and effects, which I think gives it a much more, I think it helps the film look more expensive than it is. And gives it its own distinct kind of feel to it. I assume with a title and a character named Red Sonja, I think that the idea of trying to do things muted was not going to work. But even if you look at the comic art, it is, again, it's a very muted palette, but this, very beautiful. And I applaud the use of, for the most part, now obviously there's some CGI in here, which we'll talk about. There is a lot of use of practical effects and real locations. Also in practical effects, there's like a race of baboon people. You know, one of the main baddies is this general who's a giant fucking baboon man, played by Marty Ford, I believe the guy's name is. The guy's a fucking beast. Like, he's massive. I think he's playing Shao Kahn in the next Mortal Kombat, I think. But guy's just fucking massive. You know, and they do practical makeup on him instead of motion capture, which I appreciate. I have a feeling motion capture was a bit too much for this film's budget. But one, I like practical effects, I like practical makeup, and I also applaud what is clearly creative problem solving on the part of our director. So this is directed by M.J. Bassett, and if you don't know the name, That's okay. She hasn't done anything really of note. A lot of TV episodes, kind of a journeywoman director. Kind of getting one of her first big chances to direct a much bigger project than I think she's had previously. And I applaud a lot of the creative directing choices that were made in this film in order to make it feel more expensive and look more creative than it really is. And that shows a lot of ingenuity. It shows a lot of thinking on your feet. It shows a lot of planning. There are certain cuts in here where it looks almost like the Blue Ghost movie I made with my students a few years back, where, it's a very clumsy cutting. But she's trying to hide it. And, I don't begrudge her that. I just rewatched the original Terminator. Everybody, and it's a classic and yada, yada, yada. Honestly, guys, it's not directed that well. It's real, and it has a lot of janky cuts, and I really do believe that if Terminator didn't have Arnold Schwarzenegger, it would be a Mystery Science Theater movie. I really believe that. So I don't begrudge her janky cuts or things of that nature, because she's trying to make it work with what she has. And that shows, I think, a lot of ingenuity and a lot of creativity. She's trying very hard to make a Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, spectacle on a Power Rangers budget. And boy, does the budget issues come into play a lot. So I guess we're bouncing back to the cons. Okay, let's get this one out of the way. Yeah. A lot, they try to keep the CGI to a minimum, but there's a huge set piece where our gladiator style characters are forced to fight a Cyclops. Well, the first thing I will say, kind of bouncing back and forth, this is the problem I have with this movie, is it's like a 6 of one, half dozen of the other. On the one hand, the creature design, I think, is really well done. It's a different look for a Cyclops than anything I remember ever seeing previously. So I applaud, again, the creativity and the ingenuity that went into making this look familiar and yet somehow fresh and new and original to this particular world. But then, unfortunately, it has to move, and it doesn't go well. It's okay for a little bit. They accent the positives and hide the negatives as much as they can for some of it, but then there's a scene where it charges like into the stands, and that's like a cut scene from a PS1 video game, guys. And unlike something like War of the World, I do feel bad saying that here, because again, I think that there is dedication and they're doing the best they can with what they have. And I at least can applaud the really original creature design. Here's where the other part where the budget really comes in, and it's bad. Oh, I feel so bad saying this, but it's true. The costuming in this is some of the cheapest I have seen. I've seen, Ren Fair denizens and cosplayers on TikTok whose costumes look more elaborate and, more impressive than this. They're so scour Goodwill, find what you can, and will kind of make it look medievally and peasant-y. That's not a word. Well, I guess it is now, Noah fucking Webster. I just precedented it. The costumes. And the other problem is that just about every actor looks exactly like a modern day actor who threw on this costume and now is going to the Ren Fair. None of them, this is such a weird thing to point out, none of them have, like, the long hair, the kind of scraggly, unkempt long hair and shaggy beards, and a lot of their hair is short and very neatly cut. I refer you now to Game of Thrones, where even the rich people, even people like Joffrey or Tyrion or Jaime, their haircuts are not perfect and they're not even, and because you wouldn't have been able to do as much back then, even the rich people. Higher ups like Tywin Lannister had his hair very neatly cut. Of course, the higher up women had theirs obviously cared for, but they look like it's a medieval environment that their hair is existing in. But they all just came straight from the barber, and they look very clean cut, like the slaves, the gladiators. They look, they're the most well-tailored and groomed gladiators I've ever seen. It's just, they try. Again, they really try. The general, the ape general, has a neat suit of armor. All of the baddies, the foot soldiers, have very distinct armor, so that looks good. And they tried to do what they could with Sonja's battle bikini. I like how they kind of make it a point of the ridiculousness of it. I like how they kind of work that into the story, that her wearing a bikini was because she was a gladiator and it was there to, wow the crowd and wasn't meant to be practical. And then she kind of adopts it as a symbol of her, it becomes her recognizable outfit, so she armors it up. So I like that they took the time to kind of explain some of those details. But yeah, just a lot of this just looks, it's, this is a time to talk about the actors. And this is again a 6 of one, half dozen of the other in this. Another thing that I have encountered a lot of times during my tenure reviewing films is you get movies like this that don't have star power. And a lot of times these movies are made up of journeyman actors and actresses who are going to make the very, very best of the opportunities that they have been given. I'm given a chance to headline a movie, play the title character. I'm going to give it everything I've got. And sometimes that everything you got just isn't much. And other times you can be impressed by how someone really came to play. So I want to say that there is not one bad performance here. All of the actors came to play. I think all of them understand that, this is an opportunity for them. It's an opportunity for them to do something that maybe they've always dreamed of, being a big action hero or being in one of these fantasy epics, or how much fun is it to run around and sword fight? That's fun. And all of them are pulling their weight. Every single one of them is doing a really good job. I have to give special praise to Matilda Lutz, who is playing our title character. An actor who I have no knowledge of, and I looked at her IMDb page, nothing jumped out at me, but someone who clearly was given the ball and was going to run with it. And I think she does a pretty decent job. I can't say it's a great job because I think the script lets her down a little bit. Everybody in the script has this problem of they have to balance between a script that is at one time horribly cliche written, and you're forced to say some of these ridiculous lines with a straight face, and other times a script that is much more profound and clever than it has any real right to be, to the point where you're like, oh, that kind of almost redeems a lot of negative thoughts I had. So everyone in this is trying. Here's the issue. There isn't a single performance that has the gravitas, the presence that a film like this, a character like this requires. There's a reason why the original Conan movies and even the original Red Sonja went with the stunt casting of Arnold and Bridget Nielsen. They're big, charismatic, they leap off the screen. There's a reason why Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones hire schooled, classically trained British and European actors, because they are trained to treat every role, regardless of the ridiculousness of the dialogue or the premise, with equal gravitas as if you were performing King Lear. That is what they are there to do. Why is Sean Bean in so many of these things? That's fucking why. There's a reason why British actors are cast in comic book movies or space operas. That's why Patrick Stewart works in Star Trek and in X-Men. That's why when they cast the Klingons during the 90s heyday of Star Trek, they hired Shakespearean stage actors so that they could deliver these grand, honor field lines with an air of authenticity. And I don't know if it's because they just don't have the experience. I don't know if it's just kind of one of those things that you have or you don't have. But there's not a real presence in this movie. The closest we get is Matilda Lutz does a great job, again, trying to be the backbone of the film. Willis Day, I think is her name, plays one of the heavies, plays like the this white-clad warrior woman who's like the best warrior out there. She's Sonja's main head-to-head baddie. She has a nice presence, and the costume and everything look pretty good on her. Our main bad guy, Robert Sheehan, he's not intimidating. He is not an intimidating villain. But, now again, this is the 50-50 booking of this script. The thing is, he's not necessarily supposed to be intimidating. His whole gimmick is that he's like a nerd who is trying to conquer this world where might makes right with technology and knowledge. And instead of having it be a better world, he just creates a new kind of tyrant. So I understand that he's not like a big hulking character, or a really intimidating presence, because he's not really supposed to be. But still, when our main heavy walks on, he should be shot in a way, or framed in a way, or costumed in a way that makes me go, ooh, shit. Okay, great example. Ramsay Bolton, Game of Thrones. At first look, not an intimidating person, especially if you see him on Vicious, where he's kind of a mimbo. Yet the way he's shot, the color palette they use with him, the way his hair is done, the kind of grimy look on him, there's something not right about him from the moment we meet him. And this guy just, Emperor Dickhead just doesn't have that. But again, bouncing back, let's talk about the other aspect of the script. Is that one of the things this film really nailed, and it was fucking awesome. The final showdown between Sonja and Emperor Dickhead was not a punch-up, big elaborate Darth Maul, Obi-Wan sword fight. It was a quiet moment of the two of them sitting and sharing common trauma, and it's a movie that actually creates a much more three-dimensional bad guy than we've seen in a comic adaptation in a while. We've seen bad guys that have understandable motivations or sympathetic reasons, but to say that we've had a fully three-dimensional villain, I struggle to kind of think of one. And I'm talking about like in a standalone. Things like Loki, who had multiple films to kind of work through and do his face heel turn shtick. That's like comparing it to a TV show. A movie, you get one shot, one chance. And by elevating him up, it also elevates our hero up. She is not just a barbarian. She is someone who we know at the beginning of the film is very in touch. She's been living in the woods and living on nature, and so she's, again, looking very well groomed for someone who's been, living in nature, but that's fine. We'll forgive it. But she's not this kind of, Arnold, I'm going to chop your head off and say a witty retort. She is someone who forgives. And I love that. I don't consider this a spoiler, because if you don't know how a movie like this ends, again, go watch any movie ever. She actually forgives him, not for the bad things he did, but for the child he was, who lived through horrible things and made the wrong choices in terms of how to deal with them. So she's a sympathetic hero who doesn't just chop people down because they're in her way. That the ending is like really fucking good, well acted, well written, well directed, and pays off some of the weaker elements that the film had going in. Like, again, something that I think, modern day blockbusters, Marvel and DC could both take a note from this. The ending is really well done. I'll also say that on the good side, the combat, the stage fighting, the fight scenes are all really good. I like how they kind of show Sonja evolving as she learns, because she's kind of self-taught, and then she's with the gladiators, and she picks up bits and pieces there. I like, this is not something you see often. So in her first showdown with the Lady in White, again, I don't remember the character's actual name, so I'm just going to call her the Lady in White. She holds her own, but then she gets her ass kicked. And we're expecting that, because we all know how this is going to come about. When they meet again, she's now a seasoned warrior, and now she's going to win the day. That's not what happens. They meet again. She holds her own a bit better. She lasts longer. She still fucking loses. I love that. I love that it was like, no, this person who's been training their entire life is still going to beat the shit out of this person who's only been training for maybe a month or so. But what Sonja has as a hero is a determination, a willingness to live, and a link to supernatural forces that are very vaguely defined that let her keep coming back again and again and again and again. I guess it's the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the script and the bizarre writing of it. So the film starts off with a narration, which I hate. I hate. Because a film like this, you don't need it. You don't need a narration to say, in the peaceful land of Flabada, there lived the peaceful Hookliff people until the day the evil Emperor Dickhead rode into town. And, you know, it's like, it's a fucking barbarian movie. We know, we can guess what goes on. It's not really, this world does not have the dense backstory that Lord of the Rings has, where you need to kind of explain where the ring came from. I think they could have gone the Game of Thrones route. Just start the fucking movie and let us kind of get into it as it goes. There's another scene in this after Sonja gets her ass kicked the second time by the lady in white, where she's reborn again. The prophecy, again, this vaguely defined prophecy comes back into play, and she's reborn by some bizarre spirit woman, and all of this stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. I think you could have had the scenes, but I would have cut all of the dialogue. I would have just had it be a series of scenes that we can then, images that we, the audience, then have to interpret, and Sonja has to interpret. That it's a thing where she is just one person in this larger world of gods and monsters and prophecies, and she doesn't know who she is or why she's chosen or anything like that. And I think the dialogue, first of all, the dialogue is cliched and weak during the scene. It's very flat, and the actors are doing their best, but it just comes out sounding really, really bad. So I just think you could have done it and just cut the dialogue and let the images speak for themselves. I think that would have helped a lot. Okay, I think I've covered every major point I had to make. And as you've seen, I've gone back and forth on everything. It seems for every bad thing, there's a good thing. For every really shitty moment, there is a moment of real brilliance and insight that contradicts it. And I leave this film going, I don't know what I think. Usually my tiebreaker is, would I watch it again? Would I buy it on Blu-ray and add it to my collection? And if I'm being honest, I would probably say yes. I have a lot worse movies in my collection. I've rewatched way worse. And I think that this is a film where if you watch it and you hate it, I would completely understand. This is not one that I would defend the merits of like I would for, say, X-Men Origins Wolverine. I'll still defend that movie. I'll still defend Spider-Man 3. I'll even defend X-Men 3 somewhat. This isn't one that I'd be like, oh, okay, I think you're off base. I'd be like, yeah, I can see why you would hate it. But I think there is a genuine love that the filmmakers and everybody involved had, a goal they all had, that comes through. You know, my favorite television show is Mystery Science Theater 3000. And of course, the gimmick of that is they have to watch the worst movies ever made. But you know the funny thing about that? Some of these movies that they watch, there are ones, you know, like Hobgoblins and Manos that are complete bullshit. But then you get ones like Time Chasers, Tormented, Gunslinger, Last of the Wild Horses, even something like Revenge of the Creature, where there is a genuine story and a genuine, there is a spark sometimes of brilliance in those films that just wasn't able to be realized due to budget or time or, you know, the talent involved. But you can see that there was something that that the filmmakers had and they were pushing towards. And it elevates those movies up to something that, yeah, isn't great, but is somehow strangely endearing. This is why films of theirs like Prince of Space, the Gamera series, Space Mutiny, that's why those films have enjoyed these kind of cult classic revitalizations, because if there was nothing there, if there was no genuine like passion or talent at work, then they'd be shit. And I do sense the genuine passion and enthusiasm that the people working on this project had. And that elevates it up, for me at least, from something that normally I would rip apart to something that I say there's something endearing about this movie. It has kind of a Clerks air to it, of a bunch of friends made a movie, or people became friends making a movie, and they just wanted to make their movie. And almost an Ed Wood-esque connection to it. And I can't hate that. I can't be mad at that. So, when asked what my final grade is for Red Sonja, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to say it's a C+. I think that's generous. I think maybe upon retrospect it might average out at a C, maybe even a C-. But I'll be damned if I didn't leave this experience going, that movie made me think about it more than a lot of films I have this year. I actually had to do some digging and some analysis to pick this film apart, and for that, I will always give it a pass. I'd say check it out. It's interesting enough to check out. Maybe you'll hate it. Maybe it'll be a cult classic. Who knows? But I think there's something endearing here, and I will always champion that. Okay, I've talked on for a long time on this movie. Holy shit. But so let's wrap it up. So thank you for coming with me. Thank you for listening. Thanks for your patronage. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.